The MCU has as many families as it has movies. Each introduces a new superhero or important character, so keeping track of all their relationships is pretty crucial to your viewing experience. Let's get into every family we've seen so far, from the start of their lineage to the present. Odinson family. The Odinson lineage isn't just a key part of Asgard, they're essential for the universe. It started with Buri, the first king of Asgard, although not much is known about him in the movies. In the comics, though, Buri was the first of the Aesir and the third being in all of creation after the giant Ymir and the cow Athumla, who found him in Niflheim. Buri himself was millions of years old when he established Asgard. He's also the one responsible for making Asgard the protector of the Nine Realms, generally keeping the peace throughout his rule. He was terrifyingly powerful too. In Thor number 355, he pretty much ragdolled Thor like a kid. Although to Buri, he really was just a kid. The two he talks about are likely Bor and Odin. His son, Bor Buri's son, succeeded Buri, and we've eventually gotten a look at him. Bor followed in his father's footsteps because his rule was defined by protecting the Nine Realms, especially against Malekith during the first Dark Elf conflict, which coincided with the convergence of the Nine Realms. After he beat Malekith and his forces, he took the Reality Stone, known as the Ether.
But its power is too great. Bury it deep. Somewhere no one will ever find it.
Now, there's a wise king. The rule of Buri and Bor is what made Asgard so important. It was an extremely powerful force in the universe that nobody could compete with, responsible for keeping order and peace. Bor eventually married Bestla, a frost giantess, and had 4 children, though in the MCU, we only see one of them. They were Odin, Kull, Vili, and Ve. Now, see, none of these guys followed the script. We don't see any of them besides Odin in the MCU. But in the comics, they did a complete 180 from the example Buri and Bor set. Kull, in particular, was a disgusting tyrant known as the Asgardian god of fear. He fed on the terror of his subjects. And eventually, Odin, Vili, and Ve rebelled against him in Mighty Thor number 7. Odin sealed his brother away because he could not kill him, renamed the realm he ruled over to Midgard, and became the Allfather. Vili and Ve, on the other hand, were a lot more sane. They fought alongside Odin and generally had a great relationship with their little brother. Eventually, after learning of the prophecy of Ragnarok, the 3 of them took on Surtur in an attempt to prevent Ragnarok. They, of course, weren't able to beat him. Surtur's a lot tougher in the comics. Vili and Ve then sacrificed themselves to save Odin, giving up their cosmic power and transferring it to their brother. And thus, the Odin Force was born. After that, Odin wasted Surtur pretty brutally. The MCU is a lot different. It's never made clear how Vili and Ve died, and Odin himself is more of a conqueror than a wise, benevolent king. He married Frigga and had a son with her, Thor. He adopted Loki, his 3rd child, during one of his many battles. See, Odin's rule was defined by his aggressive conquering of all the realms. He had a partnership with his Hela, his firstborn daughter, who is Thor's half-sister. We never really find out who the mother is.
We were unstoppable. I was his weapon in the conquest that built Asgard's empire. One by one, the realms became ours.
Odin used her power to violently bring the 9 realms under Asgardian rule. Hela herself was a vicious warrior. She wanted power for the sake of it, and when Odin realized this, he sealed her in Hell, a dark and icy dimension. He tied the seal to his own life force so that it would only break when Odin died.
My life was all that held her back, but my time has come. I cannot keep her away any longer.
Oh, who are you talking about?
Goddess of Death. Hela.
He's definitely not winning any Father of the Year awards, and some might argue that if he were a better dad, most of Ragnarok wouldn't have ever happened. Over time, though, Odin became very tired of war, even banishing Thor for unnecessarily pissing off the giants and suggesting war against them.
Arrogance and stupidity, you have opened these peaceful realms and innocent lives to the horror and desolation of war! You are unworthy.
This was right before Thor was set to take over as king of Asgard, by the way. In the comics, he's even more of an ass, often being portrayed really differently depending on the writer. Sometimes he's a raging drunk, and sometimes he's just an egotistical dad who hates it when his kid talks back. Still drunk, by the way. Then there's his wife Frigga, who is probably the most different in the MCU when compared to her comics version. In the MCU, she was raised by witches and taught magic, and she's one of the best users in Asgard. She was also the mediator in the family. She realized that Loki probably felt inferior because of Thor and Odin, and taught him magic to help him find his own place.
Time rooting around for the Tempad when someone taught you fairly decent magic.
My mother.
Frigga, unfortunately, was killed when the Dark Elves attacked Asgard. Despite putting up a great fight, it wasn't enough, and she died protecting Jane Foster. Still took two pretty powerful Dark Elves to kill her, though. In the comics, though, she's not his birth mother. That's Gaia, the elder goddess of Earth, who Odin specifically had Thor with so it would produce an heir with a deep connection to Midgard. Frigga still raised him, though. Moving on to Thor and Loki, these two have a really complicated relationship. It's defined by constant jealousy and inferiority from Loki, and anger and refusal to understand Loki from Thor. They start off as complete enemies, but over time, especially due to Frigga's death, they become much closer, and the original Loki ends his story opposite to where it began. He actually tries to save his brother and stand up to Thanos. His story doesn't end there, though. The variant from the Battle of New York in Loki Season 1 and 2 picks up his tale again. Now, Thor's got a kid of his own, Love, the daughter of Gore, the God Butcher, and is raising her pretty well, to be honest. Still not sure about a child wielding Stormbreaker and fighting aliens, but stranger things happen in the MCU daily. The Stark family. This one's even more different in the comics than the Odinson family. You know how Tony really loved his dad in the MCU? Well, in the comics, he's an abusive drunk who ruined Tony's childhood. He has a much better relationship with his mother, who often protected him from his father's drunken bouts of verbal and physical abuse. One night, she found herself in a casino owned by Howard Stark and ended up losing a fortune there. Then the two met, escaped the casino, and started a romantic relationship. The rest is kinda simple. They married, had a decent enough life, since both of them were really well off, and then they tried for a baby. Now, this is where things get deeply, deeply weird. And if you're a movie-only fan, you are in for a ride. You see, Howard and Maria had a lot of trouble having a kid. Maria did eventually get pregnant, but doctors told them the kid wouldn't survive. Desperate to do something, Howard made a deal with a sentient alien robot known as Recorder 451, who was captured by an alien race known as the Greys. Howard assembled the Stark 7 to break him out. The deal here was that Howard would free him and 451 would genetically modify the baby so he would survive. The robot, of course, didn't exactly do that. Instead, he modified him to be the only one who could pilot an alien weapon of mass destruction, the God Killer, having selected the unborn Stark as the one who would accelerate humanity's technological growth. These aliens, the Regalians, were obsessed with observing planets, but 451 specifically, they went rogue. He wanted to prepare Earth for intergalactic conflict and decided that the best way to do that was to artificially bake a baby. He also planted a kill switch in the baby to act as a failsafe, but Howard found out about it and he messed with it. And then Howard and Maria had their first kid, Arno Stark. Yeah, this is probably a really good time to tell you guys that Tony is, well, adopted. It's one of the most controversial retcons in all of Marvel. Added Tony isn't a biological Stark at all, and he was actually born to two S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, Amanda and Jude Armstrong, who were actually secretly Hydra agents. Despite that, Tony was always raised as a Stark, both in his family life and legally. And why was he adopted? Well, Howard's interference with the kill switch made Arno fatally ill, and Howard hid him away in the Maria Stark Foundation, both to treat him and keep him safe from alien threats. But they needed to have a kid to take Arno's place, and that was Tony Stark. It's an extremely messy family. Tony never even knew his brother existed and spent most of his life suffering from his strained relationship with his dad. They eventually did meet, and get this, Howard left a recording about the truth behind Arno. That's it. He's easily top 5 worst dads in Marvel. Both of Tony's parents still died, but not because of Bucky Barnes. Instead, the Roxxon Corporation assassinated them. That's also the only thing the movies have in common with the comics. Tony did resent that his dad was never around in the films.
This is why I love coming over at Christmas, right before you leave town.
But besides that, he had an astronomically better relationship with his parents. Eventually, Tony married Pepper Potts and had Morgan Stark. Although much like his father, he's not going to be around for her life, since, he's dead and all. Hawkeye's family. When people think of Hawkeye, they usually picture him with gods, aliens, and his fellow Avengers, but it's his family that really makes Clint Barton a person.
Gentlemen, this is Laura.
Clint's wife, Laura Barton, is one of the few healthy relationships he's ever had. She knows all about his life as a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent and as an Avenger, and accepts him for who he is, even though it comes with a lot. By the way, did you know she's strongly implied to be an ex-S.H.I.E.L.D. agent?
Thank you.
I want to take better care of your stuff.
That's a S.H.I.E.L.D. watch right there, only given to agents. She may have been inspired by Agent 19, aka Mockingbird from the comics. That makes her one of the few people that can understand Clint, and I gotta hand it to him. That's a pretty successful workplace romance. For example, Hawkeye has to hide his family away on a reserved, isolated farm instead because he wants to keep them away from everything.
Yeah, well, Fury helped me set this up when I joined. Kept it off S.H.I.E.L.D.'s files, like to keep it that way. I figure it's a good place to lay low.
That's a big ask when she could just have a cozy New York apartment on a commercial street. But Laura never complained about it. Also, I really like to believe this whole moment where the Avengers meet Clint's family is the moment when Tony and Steve realize that they truly want a family life. I mean, look at their faces. Then there are the kids, Cooper, Lila, and Nathaniel. They're Clint's heart and soul. And the reveal that Clint is a full-on dad had everyone, Avengers and fans, just shocked.
Sorry for barging in on you.
Yeah, we would have called ahead, but we were busy having no idea that you existed.
As for Clint's own parents, well, we do get to see Edith Barton, but the dad is a bit of a darker story, and we'll get to that in a minute. Plus, Lila takes after her dad, and she's already a pretty good shot, too. Clint's family in the movies works as his anchor, something that keeps him tied to his better self, and when they get snapped, he takes a seriously dark turn in Japan. It's one thing to go through it, but the stuff he was doing even had James terrified. So, about Clint's dad. We don't see Harold in the movies, but in the comics, he's an abusive, violent drunk that beat on Clint and his brother, Barney, pretty much all the time. They were broke, and he turned to the bottle to cope. Marvel really has a dad problem. It also has a parents dying in car crashes problem. But this one was no assassination, just classic age-old drunk driving. Sadly, it took away the one good relationship Clint had as a kid, his mother. The Maximoff family. I'm going to get the really confusing stuff out of the way first. So, originally, Wanda and Pietro were the children of Magda and Magnus Leshner, but they were taken by the High Evolutionary after being abandoned by their mother. Their dad didn't know they really existed. After this, the High Evolutionary gave the Maximoff twins to Django and Mariah Maximoff, who were Romani travelers who raised them in Serbia. Then, this was retconned in the Golden Age, and they were children of a speedster hero known as Wizard, aka Robert Frank, and Miss America, aka Madeline Joyce. This time, the High Evolutionary's cow, servant thing, named Bova, gave them to Frank. Then, this got retconned again, and they were now the children of Magneto. Plus, they're both mutants now. But wait, we are not done. This got retconned one more time in 2014, and now their father is actually unknown, though their mother is Natalia Maximoff, the sister of Django, and a powerful sorceress who held the title of Scarlet Witch before Wanda. Apparently, it's a family title that gets passed down her bloodline instead of a super ancient dark prophecy about Wanda in specific. It's genuinely one of the most painful lineages to keep track of as a comic fan because it's been changed 10 times over. The only thing that stays consistent is that Wanda was born on Vundagor and experimented on by the High Evolutionary, which gave her and her brother powers. Thankfully, in the MCU, it's a lot simpler. They were born to Olek and Irania Maximoff in Sokovia and lived a really simple, normal life. Wanda grew up with a love of sitcoms, and Pietro did his own stuff, I guess. They never really elaborate on it much. Their parents were killed in an explosion caused by a Stark Industries missile, and this led to the twins becoming activists with a deep hatred against Tony Stark. Their political drive also led them to accept experimentation from Hydra, which led to their superpowers. Then you know the rest. Pietro's fast, but not fast enough to save Clint and not die. Wanda fell in love with Vision, but he died, and Wanda was never the same. Now her kids, Billy and Tommy Maximoff, the thing is, they're not real in the most traditional sense. Wanda made them with chaos magic, and they exist alongside the Westview Hex. They disintegrated when Wanda dispelled the Hex. But are they just hallucinations? No, not really. Billy and Tommy were very much real human beings inside the Hex, who later reincarnated in two different families. Billy's soul went into the body of William Kaplan after a car accident killed the boy. Now, Tommy's soul was saved by Billy and put into the body of Tommy Shepard, who was unfortunately drowned by a bunch of bullies. And how did Billy do that? The answer is magic. In the comics, it's the same deal. Wanda makes her kids through magic, since, well, Vision can't have kids. But she actually uses the lost soul fragments of Mephisto. This leads to a villain known as Master Pandemonium, who had lost his arms. Mephisto makes a deal with him to replace those arms, and this is one of those moments where I just let you see for yourself. See those babies? That's Billy and Tommy Maximoff. Yeah, they're somebody's arms. Even that happened. And after that, they get absorbed into Mephisto, and Scarlet Witch gets her memories erased by Agatha because she can't take the grief. She also does end up making a new reality, where they're all still alive. But that's a whole separate, deeply disturbing Wanda story where she decimates the mutant population. It's called House of M, and it's just a lot. The Maximoff family is deeply confusing in the comics, and deeply sad in the movies. The Wakandan royal family. Now, in the movies, it started with Bashenga, who was the first Black Panther and the first one to unite all the tribes of Wakanda. He's the dude who founded the Golden Tribe. He was chosen by the goddess Bast, and honestly, he's regarded really highly in Wakandan history. In the comics, it's a bit different. It started with Masi, a chieftain who lived in 1 million BC. This dude was the first ever to take the power of the heart-shaped herb, and get this, he was also a part of the Avengers. How? Even in 1 million BC, there were Avengers, consisting of Allfather Odin, Firehair, Agamotto, Ghost Rider, and the Iron Fist. From there, it's mostly the same deal as Bashenga. Masi understood vibranium and laid the foundations of the Wakandan Empire. Following his death, the tribes fell into warfare, and even in the comics, Bashenga united the tribes. The only difference is that he wasn't the first Black Panther. And Shuri wasn't the first woman to be a Panther either. That was Queen Aya Nahanda. Much like Masi, she too was part of an ancient team of Avengers, working alongside a younger Thor. The next family members is where the comics and movies differ. In 1941, we had T'Challa, also known as Azuri, who basically fought off a lot of Nazis with Captain America. He was also the grandfather of T'Challa, and his reign was a lot more hostile generally than T'Chaka or T'Challa's, but for good reason. The dude was around during World War II, and that was a pretty volatile time. He ruled together with Queen Nanali, who was a pretty successful queen, but was eventually murdered by Fritz Claw. He had 2 children with her, Sion and T'Chaka, the next king and Black Panther of Wakanda. Unlike Odin and Cole, these two actually got along very well. Sion even succeeded T'Chaka after he was assassinated by Ulysses Claw as both king and the next Black Panther. King T'Chaka's portrayal in the MCU is pretty accurate to his comic version. He was a king who was willing to do anything for Wakanda, even killing his own brother, because his smuggling of Wakandan weapons into the US threatened to expose Wakanda to the whole world.
Return home at once, or you will face the council and inform them of your crimes.
To be fair, he did just want to throw him in jail, but N'Jobu pulled a gun on him. Could have knocked it out of his hand though, right? In the movies, T'Chaka had T'Challa with Ramonda, but in the comics, he actually had him with Nyami, an excellent Wakandan scientist who died 1 week after giving birth to T'Challa. In the movies though, Ramonda is the mother of both Shuri and T'Challa, and T'Chaka's only wife. T'Chaka was murdered by Ulysses Claw during a conference in order to get Wakanda's vibranium. Fun fact, T'Challa almost got him here, and used his own gun to brutally shoot Claw. This is what led to Sion succeeding T'Chaka as king. In the MCU, the assassination was carried out by Helmut Zemo during the signing of the Sokovia Accords in Vienna. T'Challa was already the Black Panther by this point.
Extend his hand in peace.
Everybody get down!
The difference here is sort of that in the comics, T'Challa was a teenager. So in the movies, he's a warrior struggling with leadership. But in the comics, he's a teen struggling with, well, everything. In the comics, T'Challa also has 2 brothers who aren't really anywhere to be found in the MCU. One is his adopted older brother, Hunter, and then his younger half-brother, Jakara. Hunter was a Caucasian child who survived a plane crash in the neighboring nation of Mahanda. King T'Chaka adopted the boy and raised him as his own son, making Hunter the eldest child of the royal family for over a decade. Hunter developed a fanatical love for Wakanda, becoming a crazed nationalist. Naturally, T'Challa's birth didn't sit well with him, since he realized he couldn't actually inherit the throne. It's the Loki and Thor dynamic all over again. Anyway, T'Challa still wanted to do something for him, so he appointed him head of the Wakandan secret police, where he was known as the White Wolf. He disbanded the unit when he discovered that Hunter's methods were pretty brutal. Jakar was also a rebel, born to T'Chaka and a Wakandan spy named Matina. Jakar was actually exposed to raw vibranium, which mutated him into a massive monster with the ability to absorb energy and project sonic vibrations. He attempted a coup d'etat while T'Challa was away, but he was eventually killed by T'Challa. Then there's Princess Shuri, who was a Black Panther in both the comics and the movies. She has a bit more of a warrior role in the main comics, but in the MCU, she's an unprecedented technological genius, probably relative to Tony Stark too. She's the head of the Wakandan Design Group and was also head of the Science and Information Center of the Wakandan Outreach Center. She also synthetically recreated heart-shaped herb in order to become the Panther in the MCU. Now, in the comics, Sion also had a son, Tashan, who was a bit resentful of T'Challa for taking the throne, but he was eventually appointed to the Wakandan ambassador. Eventually, he was possessed by an entity known as the Cannibal, and his body and ambassador status was used to infiltrate Wakanda. Then, you have T'Challa's cousins, who were their own superhero team, known as the Black Musketeers. It consists of Joshua Itobo, a young doctor and scientist, Kahanata, a race car driver and engineer, Aishanta, a businessman that fought with a spear and shield, and Zuni. And this one's really cool, because she's technically a grandma. But despite that, she fought against Jakara anyway. It's not the most exciting extended family, but hey, they still count. But what you might not know is that T'Challa and Storm were technically married. Yup, that's Storm. They actually met as childhood friends, and Storm even saved T'Challa once, but their marriage didn't last very long. 6 years later, they ended up on opposite sides during the Avengers vs. X-Men event. During this, Namor, who was on Storm's side, flooded Wakanda and killed millions, and being on the side of someone like that isn't the most romantic thing your wife can do. Naturally, T'Challa annulled the marriage and divorced her, and love very quickly turned to hatred. Now, there's very few members left of T'Challa's lineage besides Shuri, except his son Prince Toussaint, who is revealed to also carry the Wakandan name T'Challa. Therefore, T'Challa II. T'Challa had him with Nakia in secret during the blip, and Nakia raised him in Haiti to shield him from the political instability of Wakanda. The Banner family. You know, the movies don't really get into this, but the entire character of the Hulk is deeply tied to his family. And I do mean the big green guy. It began with Dr. Brian Banner. And yeah, it's a trend. He was a complete ass to Bruce, but on a level so much worse than Howard or Odin ever were. See, the thing with Brian is, he had an accident while he was researching how to make clean gamma energy in New Mexico. It resulted in an explosion, and from there on, the dude was convinced he had a monster gene and swore to never have kids. However, when his wife Rebecca Banner was pregnant, he started to view Bruce as an abomination. Get it? Because Blonsky? No? Okay. Anyway, Brian Banner was extremely abusive to Bruce, and I don't mean that he just hit the kid or yelled at him. He dismantled his self-esteem, identity, and mental health on a raw level. Rebecca deeply loved her son, however, and attempted to leave Brian and sneak away with Bruce, which eventually led to Brian beating her to death. This event, along with the abuse from his father, was the basis of the Hulk's identity. Banner built the Hulk in his head as a coping mechanism, a way to escape the abuse, and this led to Banner developing dissociative identity disorder. All the radiation did was give physical form to what was already in Banner's head. If you've ever wondered why he specifically manifests as a raging berserk monster, well, now you know. Bruce Banner's story is one of the darkest ones in Marvel. In terms of his extended family, you have Jennifer Walters, also known as the She-Hulk. She's actually fully capable of controlling her Hulk transformation because she's mentally a lot more stable than Bruce is. The MCU also never really elaborates on who Scar's mother is, only that Bruce now has a half-alien, half-human, fully green son. In the comics, though, Scar's mother is Kyra the Old Strong, who had a mystical energy in her known as the Old Power. She died before her sons ever grew up in an explosion on Sakaar. And yes, sons. Scar has a twin brother known as Hiro Kala, who actually became a pretty big threat to the universe. Natasha's fake family. So, in the comics, this family never existed. Natasha, Alexei, Melina, and Yelena were stationed in Ohio for 3 years as part of a deep-cover Russian sleeper cell. Their goal was to pose as a typical American family and infiltrate the North Institute, a S.H.I.E.L.D. facility secretly run by Hydra, and steal the cellular data there in order to create the Red Room's mind control chemical. In 1995, Alexei burned down the institute that ended the mission, and they realized it was time to return to the Red Room. Natasha and Yelena were eventually confronted by Red Room soldiers because these two girls didn't want to go back. I mean, they even piloted a plane in order to escape.
Okay, I need you to pull away.
They knew everything was fake, but they loved their family like it was real, and so did Alexei and Melina. But they had to, and the soldiers made that pretty clear when they held literal children at gunpoint. Natasha tried to defend her sister, and honestly, I think she had a breakdown.
Я буду стрелять! Don't touch her! Я буду стрелять!
But Alexei calmed them down, and then they were sedated, put on a plane, and taken back to the Red Room.
You're gonna take care of each other, okay? Everything's gonna be fine.
This laid the groundwork for a really complicated three-way relationship between Alexei, Natasha, and Yelena. Melina herself went back to the Red Room, which, I mean, fair. She had been through the Black Widow program 4 times. She didn't know anything else in the world. Now, things are slightly better between Yelena and Alexei, but it's one really twisted and bittersweet family.
Alone, you look only at the bed. When I look at you, I don't see your mistakes. That's why we need each other.
The Parkers. Now, I couldn't end this list without mentioning one of Marvel's most famous families. You guys know how this goes. Peter's raised by his beloved Aunt May and his Uncle Ben. His parents Richard and Mary Parker died in a tragic, vague plane crash when he was young. And that's about all the movies ever say about them. They were just normal, working-class people from Queens, right? Wrong. In the comics, the Parker family tree is a spy thriller movie. Richard and Mary Parker were highly decorated S.H.I.E.L.D. agents that traveled around the world operating deep undercover. And they definitely didn't die in a car crash. No, they were departing for a secret mission to infiltrate Red Skull's communist organization in Algeria and were discovered, which led to a plane crash that killed both of them. Yeah, that happened. Honestly, the Amazing Spider-Man movies were the only films to touch on this aspect of Peter's parents. We're all really familiar with Uncle Ben and Aunt May, but not a lot of people know that this was the real truth behind them. From there on, it's actually pretty in line with his movie portrayal. He falls in love with Mary Jane Watson, they get married, and they have a kid, Mayday Parker, who actually takes over the Spider-Man title. Except that's not really where this family ends. In fact, here's something I bet most of you didn't know about. Peter's not an only child. Richard and Mary had a secret kid he never knew about. Teresa Parker. She grew up to be a high-ranking CIA agent and was eventually recruited by Nick Fury, and she went into the foster system as a kid, never really knowing about her potential brother. So yeah, the entire Parker family is full of comic secrets that the movies never really touched on. The Pym Van Dyne Lang family. You know, I wasn't really sure about including this one because the Pym Van Dyne family is different from Scott and Cassandra Lang. I mean, it is true that Hank Pym played a mentor role to Scott, and some would even say he was a father figure. But I still feel like they're more like a superhero group that happen to know each other pretty well, rather than a proper found family. In the comics, Scott actually steals the Ant-Man suit from Hank Pym in order to rescue a doctor who can help his daughter. But in the movies, the heist is a pretty deliberate setup by Hank Pym to test Scott Lang. Scott gets fairly acquainted with Janet and Hope too over the course of the films, although his relationship with his daughter is complex.
Peanuts! Oh, happy birthday!
It started out wonderfully. They're super close, though the divorce between his wife caused a rift. But as Cassandra grew in the blip, things got a bit more complicated.
You shrank a cop car? What were you thinking?
What was I supposed to do? Look the other way? They were clearing out a homeless camp in the middle of the night.
No, I'm not
And
saying...
where do they expect them to go? It's not their fault that they lost their homes in the blip.
I know that.
No one can even afford rent right now, unless you're some trust fund asshole.
They're definitely on much better terms than Yelena and Alexei, though, that's for sure. And Hank, despite being a prickly old man, gets along with them all well enough. Well, that was a long one, but that's all the major Marvel families explained, and a lot of these have really shaped the world and universe they live in. So, who do you think we're missing, and who's your favorite? Plus, did you learn something you didn't know before about these characters?